Serving the UK's second most populated urban area is the biggest light rail network in the country, with almost 100 stations. But is Manchester really outgrowing its tram network? And is ditching the street running really the right thing to do? Manchester has been growing really quickly recently, and is arguably the UK's second city, but this growth, and the whole region in general, is being held back by the transport in central Manchester, especially the central section of the tram network. But to understand how this part of the tram became so problematic for the region, let's quickly see how Manchester got its trams. Manchester has two main railway stations, Manchester Piccadilly and Manchester Victoria. These are on the edges of the city centre and are slightly too far to walk between. To cross the city, you'd often need to change trains, involving getting between these two stations. So it was clear that a solution was needed. In the 1970s, a tunnel was proposed between these stations, the Pick-Vic Tunnel, and would have functioned like Thameslink, with heavy rail trains travelling under the city centre. However, as always, there wasn't enough money, but something did get built. Around this time, light rail and trams were the big thing, reappearing around the world, especially in quickly growing cities that needed new rail lines for cheap. So a compromise was made. A tramway was to be built running between the two stations on the street, which would be significantly cheaper than constructing a tunnel. Then, leaving the city centre, they would take over some heavy rail suburban lines. This allowed cross-city trips to be made on one vehicle, and the two main railway stations to be connected for cheap. The Metrolink turned out to be incredibly popular, drastically improving transport in the city, and was extended over the years, becoming the system we see today. If you want to help the channel grow just like the trams, you can subscribe to the channel, and that way you won't miss out on any new videos. We also have a Discord server if you want to join that, links in the description. Metrolink's success, though, has started to become problematic. The converted rail lines and dedicated right-of-ways outside the city centre work very well. They can run at high speeds and there's lots of capacity. But the issue is that in the city centre, where all the network's many branches all converge, the tight curves, interactions with traffic and pedestrians, and densely packed stops mean that speeds are low, and therefore there isn't a lot of capacity left to cross the city centre. And of course, journey times are really long. This lack of capacity is holding back the frequency of lines outside the city centre, and means that the surrounding towns don't see quite the full potential of their tram connections. But also, the fact that the trams are on the street makes the network vulnerable to delays, or any sort of other chaos that happens on the roads. This isn't ideal, but we can usually tolerate it on most tram networks in exchange for the stops being convenient and accessible, and also being cheap to build. But with just how many lines and how many trams Manchester needs to squeeze through the city centre, even the smallest delay can quickly affect the entire network, and for a city this big, that just can't be ignored. In 2017, a second city centre crossing was built on parallel streets. This helped improve the capacity issue, allowing more trams to run through the centre, and more trams could run across the whole network too because of this. But with many more tram extensions proposed to keep up with the city's growth, and a need for more frequent trams on existing lines, the city centre is yet again the limiting factor on capacity for the system, and the idea of a tunnel is being taken seriously again. Although expensive, getting trams off the street through the centre of the city solves a lot of issues. First of all, the most obvious thing is that trams would be way faster in a tunnel than on the street. They could take a more direct route, not winding around buildings. Because of this, they could operate at higher speeds, but also they wouldn't need to be careful of people walking around or crossing traffic. Not only would journey times across the city be improved, but with a quicker, dedicated alignment, trams could run more frequently, again improving the capacity of the network. Reliability would be improved too, as there are less things that could go wrong in a tunnel than on the street. So of course, this tunnel absolutely needs to be built. Now, there are plenty of videos already on YouTube going into the details of what a tunnel could look like, what services would look like, and even how the trams could be converted into a full metro on some lines, something like the Tyne and Wear metro or the DLR or whatever else people think would be cool. But what I don't hear a lot of people talking about is what would happen to the existing two lines along the street in the center of the city. The main reason to build a tunnel, and even why the second route through the city center was built in 2017, is to increase increase capacity. So if we were to convert the Metrolink into a proper, separated metro and capable of street running, that would mean removing both of these pieces of infrastructure on the street and quite a bit of capacity with it, which would almost certainly be needed in the future. Keeping the ability to run on the street is also useful for a quickly growing network. Street running trams are just really cheap and quick to build. The reason that the original tram got built, there's no expensive tunneling or viaducts or bridges or acquiring land. You can just start laying rails down and get trams running much sooner. So keeping vehicles and a system that is capable of running on the street is something that's really important for a quickly growing tram system in a quickly growing city. And that aside, the network already has some street running sections outside of the city centre, so it's not like one tunnel in the centre will magically turn it into a heavy rail metro overnight. I've also heard quite a few people talking about converting specific lines into heavy rail metro, but this also has its own issues. Currently, the entire Manchester Metrolink uses the same type of tram, and the system is operationally very flexible. Any vehicle can run on any route. By converting a single line into heavy rail, this would need its own drivers, vehicles, maintenance depots, and everything else that comes with a new mode of transport. But during disruption, these vehicles wouldn't be compatible with the rest of the network, so couldn't help out on other lines, although this one line would be insulated from any problems. And that brings us on to the next reason that the street running capability of Metrolink should be preserved, especially in the central section. Having 3 separate ways to cross the city centre would make working around a disruption a lot easier. Let's say a tram breaks down in the tunnel. You could start diverting some trams along the street to get around it, and not completely split the network in two. Just because a proper metro would be really cool, and Manchester probably should have had one from the start, doesn't necessarily mean that it's the best way going forward to improve the tram network that we did get. They are ultimately trams and have a lot of capabilities that we should be using. Anyway, I hope we see a tunnel sometime soon, and yeah, I hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you next time.